We're talking about how to plan your lessons with rubrics in mind. So as we get into this, as you're planning your lessons out, and what we mean by that is planning out how you're going to do a particular unit, chapter, topic, whatever it might be within the structure of your class. And so is it lesson planning in that way, or is it just assignment planning when we're talking about using rubrics? Well, I would argue that it has much more to do with lesson planning or unit planning, especially if we are trying to create that classroom environment of rubrics that we discussed in the last video. And so as we begin to plan out our lessons and units, we want to think through how we're going to develop our rubric process through that as well. So again, I'm going to argue that it's lesson planning. So as we begin to build our lessons for this unit, we want to build them in both level and comparative stakes in terms of, increasing level of point value, or, how big the assignment is, or however you want to state that. The level or the stakes of that assignment for the students, to where at the beginning at least it is relatively safe to experiment within their learning process using every opportunity to refer to the rubric. So again, we want to build that process of using some formative assessments along the way to getting to the cumulative assignment, whatever that might be, at the end of this particular lesson or unit or chapter, whatever we're calling it. And so we want to build that in every unit that we have. We want to build that opportunity and stakes level for our students to work their way through learning whatever student learning outcome or objective or whatever it is that they're on for this 3-week unit or 1-week topic or whatever it is. And so we want to build in our process of using rubrics as well. And that could even mean that it's just a small rubric for some of the first, maybe the first formative assignment in the learning process here, working our way up to, a pretty multifaceted rubric for the final assignment. And so we want to build that process as we go here. So as you're planning out an assignment in particular, we want to use and think through, based on the information that you've covered in this class, or in your class, to where you are working through what you're doing, the SLOW, again, student learning outcome or objective, whatever you're wanting the students to learn or what they need to learn based on state outcomes and those kinds of things, and the value of the assignment based on the comparative point value within your overall grading system. So is this a big assignment in terms of points, or is it just a small formative assignment along the way? Determine the best question or prompt for students to answer in order to demonstrate their learning to you. So as you're planning out developing this assignment, we want to think, what is the best thing that they can answer or address or speak to or whatever in order for them to show me that they have learned what they're supposed to learn. And as I think about that question or prompt, I'm going to think about the activities that we're going to be doing to get them to learn that information. Okay? And hopefully it's a mixture of things, not just lecture from you, but there are activities that they will be participating in to learn that information. Once you have that, you want to decide on what methods your students could use to demonstrate their level of learning for this content. So again, I'm a big advocate for this. I would love to see assignments for students to where they don't have to write an essay. They don't have to just take a multiple choice test. They don't have to, whatever. That the assignments are pretty open. That if a student can create a video or create a website or do a presentation or write an essay or take a test or, whatever, that they have the options built within that you are going to create this question, prompt, instructions, however you want to phrase that, to them to where they can choose how they want to demonstrate their learning to you. Because again, I want you to be open to that concept that our goal is that students will just learn the material, right? And be able to demonstrate that they've learned that material. And so if they can do that in some other way, especially if they can talk through our subject matter using good vocabulary, correct terminology, those kinds of things, that's what we want from our students, that they can share the information from our course with other people. Then determine how you're going to scaffold those other kind of pre-assignments, formative learning assignments that they're going to learn along the way. Where are they going to taste the soup along the way to refine their learning and know whether they're on the right path or not, so that you will build them up to being successful with this overall bigger assignment that is going to demonstrate what they've learned about this overall topic, unit, whatever it is, in the longer term scale of however long it's taking you to cover it in class. Then plan out a time frame for that learning process. Now, I know this is part of the most frustrating part of being a teacher, I believe, in this particular day and age and climate and so on, is that you have to get things through so quickly. And so it is difficult, I know, to get concepts to where your students can build in this way and build in their learning and thoroughly demonstrate that they've learned before you're going to move on to the next thing. And so I understand it's very difficult to work that in. So that's why it requires this planning out process, to where you can hopefully develop the learning process over a time period of something at least, not just one day. And so try to plan out that time frame for this particular unit you're working on. And then as you're doing that, you want to begin to build the rubrics for these assignments then. So as you begin that planning out of the entire unit and what assignments you're going to have them do along the way, formatively to learn to get that to that summative assignment at the end, then we want to build the rubrics to go along with those too. And you can do this either backwards or forwards, really. You can either start by building the little rubrics or the formative assessments, the smaller assessments along the way. Build those rubrics to where you maybe then know what to include in the big rubric at the end. Not that they have to have the same concepts in them, but that would be logical. Or work your way up through that, or create the culminating assignment rubric first, and then figure out how you're going to build your students up to being able to demonstrate all of that learning by demonstrating little pieces along the way, and then build those formative assessments that go along with what they're supposed to learn along the way. So whatever makes more sense to you, and it may make sense one way for one particular lesson unit or whatever, and maybe the other way for another particular unit, just depending on what you're covering and what your subject area is and all those types of things. But try to do your best, and again, I know the time concept is so difficult here, but try to leave time and thought for reteaching if needed. So if your students stumble along the way somewhere, that they didn't quite catch the concept in one of those formative assessments in terms of a large group or large percentage of them, to where you have to go back and reteach something because they didn't catch it, do your best to leave time for that. If it's individuals, just if one or two or three, whatever, individual students, then you can reteach them individually. Hopefully there's time for that somehow. Be sure to build the rubric, whichever one you're working on, to allow for creativity on your students' parts, right? And allowing them for multiple methods of demonstration. So I talked about there earlier. Allow them some creativity to use their God-given talents and skills and things they've learned in the past and those kinds of things to be able to choose a method to demonstrate their learning to you. And your rubric is built so well, it doesn't matter whether it's a video they've created or a paper they've written or a poster board that they've made or whatever it is, or however they choose to show you that they've learned this information. Your rubric has got it covered because you're measuring things that are not specific to how many paragraphs they have, or whether their grammar is correct, or whatever it might be that's specific to one kind of assignment. Then plan on how this will actually be graded in terms of time-wise for you, is what I'm talking about here. Are you going to be doing this within class? Because if they're presenting a live presentation, then I find it way easier, at least for me personally, to have a rubric right there, and as they're presenting, I'm circling, performance levels within the rubric, and I'm just kind of flowing with them and writing down quick comments and those kinds of things. Some people can do that, some people can't. I understand. Or is it something that you're going to do after class? They've submitted a video for you to watch later, and you're going to review it and do your rubric later. Those kinds of things. And so plan on how you're going to be actually grading this, because that could constitute some of the time element included for this particular process. So as you build your rubrics throughout this unit, throughout this lesson planning process, obviously use what you've gained from this course to build awesome, thorough rubrics that will measure not only each student's final learning, but also their depth of understanding along the way with the formative tools that you're using to get them to that final learning. Okay? And build those performance levels to where you truly understand the depth of their understanding. You can measure the depth of their understanding and learning. Determine if there's time or room or whatever for multiple activities or assessments that can use the same rubric over a period of time. So within this lesson plan process that you're building here, is it possible, or do you already have built into it maybe that over the next 4 weeks that you're going to talk about how to write a full essay, that little essays along the way can be just have one rubric to where you're building very specific skills along the way to do that? And so determine if you can include that in the process. Provide as much feedback as you possibly can to your students. Just flood them with information on how they can do better next time, right? Be sure to allow time for them to review each rubric before any of their submissions. So in other words, be sure that they have access to the rubric in the process before they even start the assignment. Make sure that they have it either online, a physical copy of it, however you're providing it to them, so that they can always refer to it as they're creating their submissions for that assignment. So think about that process, think through that, and you can say chicken or the egg here, whether you're lesson planning and those kinds of things of what we just talked about here, build a classroom environment of rubrics, or it's the way that I presented it, where we're trying to build a classroom environment where we include rubrics throughout our classroom. And so in that, we build lessons and units and formative assessments and activities and those kinds of things with rubrics in mind. Just some food for thought here for you to think through the process of the way that you plan for your students to learn.